There were over 60,000 nuclear weapons in the world in the mid-1980s. Those living in major cities or even mid-sized towns were almost literally under the nuclear gun. If the gun fired, millions would be killed instantly. Even more millions would die in the agonizing weeks to come. For the survivors, things would arguably be worse. Even if only a small fraction of these weapons went off, it would be enough to trigger a nuclear winter, the blocking of sunlight from the debris and fallout sent into the atmosphere. A 100 megaton exchange alone can produce freezing temperatures for months, even in summer, and the world's arsenals had and still have far more than 100 megatons of available yield. The famine would starve at least 1 billion people. Fortunately, several major arms reduction agreements went into place that gradually reduced the world's nuclear stockpiles from this catastrophic high. The end of the Cold War accelerated this process. Once on edge, the world began to breathe easy, believing that such nuclear confrontations were a thing of the past, until they no longer were. We may now be in the beginnings of a new nuclear arms race, with technologies that raise the stakes even higher than they were in the Cold War. What are these technologies? Why are the world's nuclear arsenals increasing again? Let's look into the face of Armageddon. North Korea's nuclear program has gotten the most attention in recent times, but the most significant developments in this grim field came from elsewhere. The first is in China. China has been a nuclear state since 1964, but has traditionally maintained a policy of minimal deterrence, keeping its nuclear stockpile at a few hundred warheads and incorporating a no-first-use policy into its official doctrine. However, Xi Jinping's rise to power has changed China's traditional military posture. Under him, China's conventional forces have shifted from having a mainly defensive purpose to being more offensive-minded and capable of power projection further from the homeland. Officially, China has maintained its traditional nuclear policy in the midst of this broader strategic shift. Unofficially, things might be starting to change there too. In late 2021, satellite footage began to pick up increased activity, suggesting that China was constructing new missile silos. By 2023, experts estimated that China was building at least 300 such silos. At the same time, the Pentagon assessed that China had more ground-based ICBM launchers between fixed silos and road mobile launchers than the United States. China is also increasing its nuclear delivery capabilities at sea and in the air. China currently has 6 nuclear-powered submarines capable of delivering ballistic missiles. However, these submarines are noisy. But China is building a new submarine, the Type 096 ballistic missile submarine. It will be much quieter and come armed with the JL-3 ballistic missile that's capable of reaching the US mainland from waters near China. In October 2019, China revealed the H-6N as its first nuclear-capable bomber that can be refueled in flight, and Beijing isn't stopping there. The H-20 stealth bomber is in development. While this bomber has been behind schedule and almost certainly isn't as stealthy as the coming B-21 or even B-2, it's a significant leap in Chinese aviation and, if it ever flies, an increase in Beijing's range and ability to deliver nuclear weapons. Perhaps the most important development, though, is in China's experiments with hypersonic missiles, projectiles that can fly at speeds of Mach 5 or greater. It's important to remember that traditional ballistic missiles have long traveled at such velocities, but they do so on predictable flight paths. Missile defense systems are designed to predict and counter these trajectories. China, however, has been developing projectiles that are unpredictable and can counter traditional missile defenses. The most notable example came in 2021 when it tested a fractional orbital bombardment system, FOBS, equipped with a hypersonic glide vehicle, HGV. A FOBS flies to a height of about 240 kilometers, which is below the height that ballistic missile defense radars are designed to detect. It then turns around, slowing in orbit to match with its designated target. It finally descends and strikes from this unexpected direction. An HGV, meanwhile, maneuvers through the atmosphere on unpredictable trajectories while maintaining hypersonic velocity, again allowing it to strike from unexpected angles. The combination of these two devices was new and sent Washington into significant alarm. The test showed that China is increasingly developing a first strike capability. At its current pace, China is on track to match the 1,500 nuclear weapons the United States and Russia deploy under the terms of the New START treaty by 2035. The second major disruption to the world's post-Cold War nuclear balance comes from Russia. The invasion of Ukraine demonstrated several important facts. First, state-based conflict was not a thing of the past. Second, Russia's conventional ability is inadequate to meet its ambitions. Putin's failure to end the war early resulted in the NATO alliance becoming stronger with Sweden and Finland's entry. Russia now has an even longer border to defend and is surrounded in the Baltic. With its conventional abilities continuing to erode through depletion and through a more unfavorable conventional balance of power with NATO, Russia has had little choice but to become more reliant on its nuclear arsenal. Like China, it's increasing its nuclear stockpile and testing hypersonic weapons. Putin has also resorted to nuclear saber-rattling in the war in Ukraine. Within days, he ordered his forces to be on their highest alert in a bid to scare the West from aiding the Ukrainians. At times, particularly during Ukraine's successes in late 2022, some experts feared that Putin would resort to the use of a tactical nuclear weapon. These are low-yield nuclear weapons meant to be used against enemy formations on the battlefield rather than to destroy cities. China has reportedly insisted that Russia not cross the nuclear threshold under any circumstances, or even to deploy nuclear weapons on foreign soil. However, Russia's forward deployment of some tactical nuclear weapons to old Soviet bases in Belarus furthers the debate about how committed Russia is to nuclear restraint, even at the urgings of its most important economic and security partner. Russia has also been developing hypersonic weapons. The United States is still decreasing its nuclear stockpile as of 2023, but Washington has realized that it allowed its nuclear capability to age and atrophy after the end of the Cold War. At the time, America fervently hoped that such weapons would no longer be important, and Barack Obama's election to the presidency seemed to make the idea of a world without nuclear weapons more real. By then, the United States and Russia had reduced their nuclear arsenals to a few thousand warheads. In 2009, the new president said he envisioned a nuclear-free world and reduced emphasis on nukes in his national security strategy. But his tenure was also the time when China and Russia began to get more restless. The return of competition with these nuclear-armed states has forced Washington to reinvest in its nuclear triad. Ironically, modernization plans for America's nuclear triad began to take shape in the Obama administration, but they matured in the Trump administration, when the realization that great power competition had indeed returned began to settle in. The $1.2 trillion effort would span between 2017 and 2046. Modernization plans would address all three parts of the triad. The new LGM-35 Sentinel ICBM will replace the aging Minuteman III missiles that have been in use since the early 70s. These will be active around 2030. The Navy has described the Columbia-class ballistic missile submarine as its top priority and is set to enter service in 2031, replacing the old Ohio class. The B-21 Raider bomber had its maiden flight in November 2023 and will enter service in 2027. It's expected to replace the B-2, currently the only American bomber capable of delivering nuclear weapons. However, the rollout of these new delivery systems might not be enough to deal with the present challenges. The United States is also investing in tactical nuclear weapons and is considering the possibility of increasing the amount of warheads in its arsenal again. On June 7, 2024, Pranay Vadi, a senior figure in the Biden administration's National Security Council, warned at the annual meeting of the Arms Control Association that there may be no choice but to build more nuclear warheads and reverse the decades-long decline if China continues to expand its arsenal and Russia continues to wave the nuclear flag. He was not the only one. Other Biden administration officials have spoken the same in testimonies to Congress over the past year. The United States has also made moves to reinvest in tactical nuclear weapons. At the height of the Cold War, Washington deployed these throughout the world. Gradually, their role was reduced. Today, the international campaign to abolish nuclear weapons estimates that there are only 100 of them deployed to 5 NATO countries. However, that is starting to change. In 2018, the Trump administration proposed the deployment of a new type of tactical nuclear warhead, the W762, which can be attached to a Trident II ballistic missile. This warhead has a yield of about 5 kilotons, 1/3 of the bomb dropped on Hiroshima. The United States produced about 50 of these by 2020. In late 2019, the USS Tennessee, an Ohio-class ballistic missile submarine, became the first vessel to be equipped with a tactical nuclear warhead. Before then, this class of weapon was exclusively meant to be airdropped. John Rood, the then Undersecretary of Defense for Policy, explained the rationale for the deployment of these new weapons in a statement from February 2020. The new warhead demonstrates to potential adversaries that there is no advantage to limited nuclear deployment because the United States can credibly and decisively respond to any threat scenario. Naturally, Russia responded badly, but in a rarity, the Kremlin's statement back then raised a point that international arms control experts would also agree with. Deputy Foreign Minister Sergei Ryabkov responded to Rood's claim by saying, "The United States is actually lowering the nuclear threshold, and that they are conceding the possibility of them waging a limited nuclear war and winning this war. This is extremely alarming." The nuclear threshold has been one of the things that has so far managed to keep nuclear weapons under control. Since the end of World War II, no nuclear weapon of any kind has ever been used in a wartime setting. Nuclear weapons can be made small enough to fit onto artillery, but even these have never been used. The result is that the current nuclear threshold is high, to the point that it's sometimes called a nuclear taboo. An unspoken agreement is that no country will resort to them unless they come under nuclear attack first. Even though the United States and Russia do not officially renounce the option of a first strike, they have observed this high nuclear threshold. However, the new emphasis on tactical nuclear weapons has made arms control authorities worry that the nuclear threshold may be lowered and made into something less than a taboo. In this regard, referring to these bombs as low-yield weapons is damaging. 5 kilotons might be a low yield compared to the strategic nuclear warheads designed to wipe out large population centers, but make no mistake, even one of these so-called tactical nuclear weapons going off would result in the deaths of thousands. The lucky ones would die quickly from the blast or incineration. The unluckier ones would suffer for weeks of radiation sickness and other injuries, as was the case in Hiroshima and Nagasaki. More importantly, the use of one tactical nuclear weapon, under the guise that it's only a limited scenario, breaks the taboo and invites proportional retaliation. Testifying in front of Congress in March 2019, General John E. Hyten, then commander of the United States Strategic Command, which is responsible for the country's nuclear weapons, confirmed that the new tactical nuclear warhead was designed to be easily used, and even that there were targets that they would be deployed against if the situation called for it. Alex Galser, an aerospace professor at Princeton University, responded to the potential of lowering the nuclear threshold through the use of tactical nuclear weapons with a sobering simulation. He showed how the use of one tactical nuclear warhead could escalate into a much grimmer war. In the scenario, Russia opened with a tactical nuclear weapon as a warning shot. NATO responded with a tactical nuke of its own. Soon, NATO and Russia were exchanging nuclear shots against one another's bases. Although these weapons were supposedly low yield, Europe was still destroyed anyway. To relieve the pressure, NATO turned to strategic nuclear warheads to destroy the Russian nukes, and Russia launched its own strategic weapons before they were lost. The crossing of the nuclear threshold just once led to Armageddon. These fears are why the United States de-emphasized its tactical nuclear weapons in the first place, but that's already begun changing. If Washington decides to increase its nuclear arsenal, more tactical warheads are likely to be built. But the new emphasis on tactical nukes is not the only thing that's changed among American policymakers. The United States, too, is experimenting with hypersonic weapons. These new unpredictable weapons present another major obstacle to the old arms control regime. Hypersonic missiles travel so quickly and unpredictably that they dramatically reduce the ability to formulate a proper response. A traditional ballistic missile, though fast, can still be detected between 15 and 30 minutes before impact, leaving enough time for defenses to come into place and for both sides to talk to each other to figure out what might be happening. FOBS systems and glide vehicles that maneuver unpredictably, keeping their targets secret until the last moment, dramatically reduce this possibility. At best, commanders will have a few minutes to figure out what's going on and talk to the other side. Hypersonic cruise missiles are also beginning to come to the fore, creating even more tools to stress air defense systems and decision-makers. These projectiles are powered by scramjet engines, which combust surrounding air at supersonic speeds, rather than having to combust it at subsonic speeds, the way normal ramjet engines do. This allows for sustained hypersonic flight. These cruise missiles can potentially be smaller than glide vehicles, enabling them to be launched from a broader range of platforms. DARPA has already tested the concept, launching a prototype from a B-52 bomber in January 2023. Air Force officials have stated that one B-52 can carry 20 such missiles. These missiles could potentially be launched from platforms in space. Mike White, the former principal director for hypersonics in Washington, said that at least one program, called Project Mayhem, was looking at the opportunity space allows relative to hypersonic cruise missile systems. The creation of multiple hypersonic delivery systems will put pressure on policymakers to reorganize the nuclear chain of command. Hypersonic weapons further incentivize decision-makers to assume the worst and to strike first. One way to potentially respond quickly enough to a hypersonic weapon is to automate a response, but this leaves the potential of something like the Skynet scenario in The Terminator, where AI decides to launch nuclear Armageddon on its own, or for hackers to create the ultimate act of cyber terrorism. More prosaically, technical malfunction or confusion could lead to war, which was something already seen in several nuclear close calls, such as the Norwegian rocket incident of 1995. During that episode, then Russian President Boris Yeltsin activated the country's equivalent to the nuclear football and prepared for a retaliatory response. Fortunately, the incident passed quietly when it was determined that the missile was not an American submarine-launched ballistic missile. A similar incident involving hypersonic weapons and automated responses might not turn out so well. As the world is seeing an increase in nuclear weapons and much more threatening delivery systems, it's also seeing a decrease in arms control measures. One by one, the treaties that reduce tensions have fallen by the wayside since the early 2000s. The New START Treaty of 2010 is the last remaining major arms control agreement. In 2023, amidst the invasion of Ukraine, Russia suspended its participation in this too, although it claimed it would continue to abide by its limits on active nuclear warheads. The treaty does not cover hypersonic weapons, as it's limited to traditional ballistic missiles. It is possible to raise the issue in the Bilateral Consultative Commission and put hypersonic weapons under its terms. However, even if this bid was successful, the treaty expires in early 2026, and with relations at their worst point since the mid-1980s, the prospect of Washington and Moscow renewing it is questionable at best. China is also not even a party to New START, and since Washington considers Beijing its foremost strategic competitor, with Moscow now a peripheral player, Chinese policy will be the most important thing to consider for America's nuclear posture, not Russian. Unless China can be induced to join an arms control agreement, it's unlikely that the United States will limit itself. There is also not likely to be limitations on autonomous weapons and decision-making systems within the next few years. Although a growing number of states profess the desire to limit these arms, international humanitarian and arms control law is insufficient to control them. Additional clarification on what categorizes an autonomous weapon is needed. For example, as long as an autonomous weapon is not deliberately programmed to attack civilians, or with knowledge that collateral damage is likely to exceed the military advantage derived from using the weapon will be acceptable within current international standards. But there is a lot of room for leeway with this interpretation. Autonomous weapons function by choosing specific targets, locations, and attack times on their own. Programmers just set the general guidelines. Major powers like the United States, China, and Russia are keen to continue developing autonomous weapons, and the current vagaries of international humanitarian law work to their advantage. Hypersonic weapons with the potential to choose their own targets are a realistic possibility. Hypersonic cruise missiles could be particularly good at this, as White noted they were better at integrating seekers than HGVs. Most footage of nuclear weapon explosions comes from before the so-called Partial Test Ban Treaty of 1963. This treaty prohibits nuclear testing in any environment except beneath the ground in order to limit fallout. This was the time of the monster nukes like the 50-megaton Tsar bomb and the United States' 15-megaton Castle Bravo bomb. These weapons were huge in physical size and not easily delivered. Only slow-moving bombers could carry them. In effect, they were designed for show and not easy use. Today's weapons, and particularly the coming hypersonic and autonomous weapons, are the opposite. A B-21 Raider stealth bomber paired with nuclear-armed hypersonic cruise missiles capable of seeking their own targets is a much easier proposition for a nuclear-first strike. The nuclear game played between the United States and the Soviet Union gripped the world in terror for 45 years after the end of World War II. This game was supposed to have ended in 1991, with the rare outcome of everyone having won. Unfortunately, the game seems to be starting again, this time with new moves that can make it potentially even more dangerous than the first time it was played. Do you think that this supposed second Cold War will be more dangerous than the first? Might there be a prospect of renewed arms control agreements to keep nuclear arsenals low and address hypersonic and autonomous weapons? Don't forget to let us know in the comments. Also, make sure to hit the like button and subscribe for more military analysis from military experts. Now go and check out where you should hide if World War III starts, or click this other video instead.